but I definitely have the passion. I don't know if I have the awesomeness that birders have, but I talk very highly of how capable and efficient and kind of crazy birders are about documenting. By far, the best group of naturalists on the planet. Nobody does better than birders. And I joke to all my botany friends that we know more about the distribution of birds than plants. And plants don't move, like, wow. Okay. You guys are all familiar with eBird, I'm sure. There's no equivalent plant thing. Professor UW and I have been trying to push for it. But yeah, plant people don't do what birders do to get that in. You wouldn't even have to go many times a year to progress. Are we good? Okay, can you forward back to the slide, beginning slide for me, please? I think you should be able to just left click.
Well, yeah, that's not working.
Not working.
I'm not.
Oh yeah, keep going, keep going. Yeah, you did. That works. There we go.
Okay, all right.
All right, so my colleague Mark Vernon could not be here, but he is a birder. This guy at an early age was a naturalist for sure, but he birds 3-4 times a week, and he's searching things down and finding them, and he got the eBird alerts, and he's one of those guys who just goes for it. He doesn't carry a lot of big glass, but he's always present and sort of finding all the really cool things. So my name is Danny. I'm representing Green River College. We're building an ecology program where we're trying to help this next generation connect. We're trying to find a way to compete with everything else out there that is occupying their minds and occupying their time. So lucky for us, the birds create a massive amount of curiosity and intrigue. And we're just really, really lucky that we have a campus that has 7 miles worth of trails. And at some level, I'm not lucky because I chose to work there. I wanted to work there because of the forest. And for those of you that have been there, it's sort of this tucked away little place. And I can still remember the day they hired me. And they always ask me the question, so why do you want to work for Green River College? And there was no hesitation. I said the forest. And they looked at me like, what do you mean? Like, we can go across the street, right? On campus, maybe 40 bird species. Right across the street, 80 species, right? It's day and night. There's so many things. We'll get into some of that as we move along. Okay, next slide, please. So again, me, I'm a big avid hiker. I haven't done as much hiking since quarantine, but people always find good pictures like this of me. Here I am holding an umbrella, walking through the Green River. People say, why would you have an umbrella? Well, to protect my camera, because everything else is expendable, right? And I know birders like cameras, so I just want to say what I'm working with is PowerShot SX70HS, crazy telephoto zoom, not super great quality, but for identification, getting a few pictures of something way out there is excellent, okay? And virtually all the pictures will be from that camera today, so we won't spend a lot of time with the pictures. And then of course, there's Mark with his typical birder binoculars, kind of camo, strap is old as mess. It's got mud and grit, and sometimes I bring in the wipes to wipe his lenses because they're just absolutely caked over. And I don't know how he uses them, but birders are magical that way, right? So he's a connoisseur of knowledge. He's sort of my antithesis. So when we're both walking on trail, we play off each other so well. I see things he does, and he sees things I don't. It's a really amazing partnership. He's a naturalist at heart. He's always looking at every little bit of a piece of rock that's chipped off because it's like, maybe this is an artifact, and he's thinking about all the possibilities. And I lean on him all the time for, what bird was that? Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot what that called. Like, he's the guy that keeps this really glued together. I'm more of the scientist that puts all the data in, but I'm getting there. And I would not consider myself a birder per se yet, because I know the bar is really high, but I'm getting there. And sometimes I have to correct him, and sometimes I hear things that he doesn't. So he's trained me to be a viewer of the avian life, which I eternally grateful for. He teaches at Green River as well, English as a second language, and he likes doing that because it helps people get jobs and things like that. But he really likes the potlucks that go associated with people from all over the world. So he is a connoisseur of food, and he gets to eat all kinds of amazing dishes. And quarantine hurt his tummy significantly, because those things went away. Okay, next slide, please. And we had one of yours come out. Anybody know this guy? Oh, he's here today. Took him on a nice whirlwind tour down to the river, probably a good 4-mile hike. Yeah, and kind of showed him how we do things, what we do. And today I could share that with you all as well. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, Ken came out in March 2021. Okay, let's get to the point. I'm a lover of nature. I smell all the trillions. I'm waiting for thimbleberry to pop out. I touch the stinging nettle. I love listening to Wilson's warbler always go, ooh, can I see it? And looking for the toupee. I just love all of the things out there. And I try every time I get a chance to immerse myself to feel more connected. And as a teacher, I've noticed something very, very significantly. I started teaching at the age of 24, and I was teaching college students in Kansas. And, you know, they know some things about nature, they know some things about life, and I'm there to train them to get them to the next step. Once I started teaching ecology, it became very clear that the gap between what they know coming in and what we need to teach them to get them to that next level kept growing every single year. It's regressing in that general human knowledge from ages 0 to 20 doesn't involve as much nature as it once did. People in my English division at the college will tell me very precisely that the lexicon that young minds are given in children's dictionaries is always evolving, right? As new words emerge in culture and society, they get put into their children's book. But they can't just keep adding words to the children's book. So they have to take some out. And they keep lists of what's happening, because that's their thing. We track birds, they track words, right? And some of the things that are going away are the really specific kinds of descriptions of nature, like brook, right? Those kinds of ways to understand the natural world simply don't make the cut anymore. Instead, things like Ethernet are now more important. Makes sense? So the new generation's ability, even if they just pick the dictionary up, their way to describe their experience is less natural than ever before. Okay? So every quarter, every year that I taught this class, making the assumption that they know the difference between a maple tree and a Douglas fir, I can't make that assumption anymore. And I know for you guys, I mean, it's kind of like, is it a bald eagle or a robin, right? I mean, it's striking. But I didn't want to get into that, oh, I'm just the old guy now, grumpy face, and say, oh, these young kids know nothing. I'm a scientist at heart, so I wanted to quantify it. So you show them this cone, and they're like, oh, is this a pine cone? And I'm like, pines. There's a part of me that's kind of concerned. Okay, so next slide. So we gave them quizzes. All right, here are 25 native birds. Tell me what their names are. We give them a list, so it's just matching, right? And the question is, how good are they? And we say you can't use the internet, okay? So let me see what's in your brain, okay? Now I'm sure all of you could get all of these except maybe this one. You all know why this one's, because those dang flycatchers look all the same. It's a western wood peewee. We know that because it was making this peewee call right before we took a picture. Right? And standing out by the river as they love when we do. So we gave them that many birds. Next slide. And then we also said, tell me how accurate your knowledge is for these things. Anybody know what these things are? Pikachu things, Pokemon. Yeah. Okay. I don't remember exactly what year Pokemon came out, but somewhere I think it was the 1990s, maybe late 80s. And it has taken the video gaming culture by storm. They're still making new Pokemon games. The number of Pokemon, I think, is like 700 species now. And there are little kids out there, similar to your knowledge of birds, will know exactly what Pokemon exactly what evolution and when to use it in a battle and when not to use it in a battle. Okay, so we use this as a demonstration to say, it's not that small little animals are hard to remember. It's just that the attention is. Okay, and then we also gave them, next slide, a bunch of wildflowers native to the region to say, what do you know about these things? Okay, so we got two naturalists, birds and wildflowers. We got one fake, let's just call it fake, right? Digital creation, another way to think about it, Pokemon list. And the next one, commercial businesses. And psychologists have demonstrated this in a bunch of different ways to demonstrate how society is preparing the young mind to deal with this new world that they're coming to. Okay, so next slide, we wanted to see how good are they. So one class, one quarter, right? Business, the accuracy is 79%, Pokemon 59%, birds 35%, and wildflowers 9%. And let me remind you, this is a matching game. They don't actually have to come up with the name, they just have to match the picture to the words. Now, if it wasn't a matching game and I was just like, let them type it in, it would have been 0% for a lot of these. I take that back, most people know American Crow, but they would have been much lower. Okay, next slide. Here's another quarter, some other class, next slide. Here's another quarter. In that quarter, a bunch of different classes, and then them all kind of lumped together. So this is a very clear, demonstratable, repeatable signal. Recently, I emailed the entire campus and did the same thing. I didn't get the 900 responses, but I got like 100 responses. And their responses were different, so totally different demographic. Their Pokemon numbers and their bird numbers almost switched. So our faculty and staff and administrators are not good on the Pokemon, but they're okay on the birds, but they fell miserably on the plants as well. And then of course, the businesses are the highest, and this is fully expected in a capitalist society that is driven by those kinds of ideals. Okay. So as an instructor, understanding where your students are coming to you tells you what you need to do to get them to whatever step you need to get them to for your class. If you assume they know more than they do, and you try and pull them from that starting point, you're not going to get it. You got to meet them where they're at. So slowly over the years, I've been regressing to more and more basic ecological understandings, and then getting into that new level that's supposed to be constant over all the decades is getting harder and harder and harder. So what we decided to do is, you know what? You're going to spend time in the forest. That is your new classroom. Next slide, please. As I was going through this, came up with a very simple, very objective truth. That is, the next generation is the most disconnected from nature in the history of humanity. And I'm not going to say it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just an objective fact. But there's something important about maintaining a connection to nature. No matter how amazing our computers have gotten, no matter how amazing how cool VR is going to be in the metaverse, none of that makes food. None of that provides clean water. And at least that kind of bare minimum understanding and respect for the system that supports us. That's what we want to make sure we're teaching them, but not teaching them, letting our forest on the campus teach them. Okay, so this is the drive. In my life, I want to do something about that. And the birds make it easy because everybody gets curious about birds. Right now, this time of year is when the little bitty birds start going, and they got the little flap, right? Like the students react to that. They get really, really interested. And no matter how great a lecturer I ever think I am, they don't pay more attention to me in front of the classroom as they do when they're out there. And of course, I get to tie their grade to it, so they are motivated. Okay, next slide, please. So we decided to immerse them in our natural forests. So here's Green River College, here's Highway 18 cutting across, and we have pretty much this whole area to play with. There's a series of trails that go all the way down to the river. Next slide. And We have, I think now 58 or 62 trails, and we marked them all out for them. And my job, part of what I do is say every quarter, okay, we're gonna break all of your students up into groups. Right now, we're doing 5 different classes, botany classes, ecology classes, environmental science classes. Say, okay, each one of you as a group, each group is going to be responsible for walking so many trails a certain amount of distance. And while you're out there, you're going to pay attention. Of course, you tell students to do that and they just walk around, they don't pay attention. So we have to make them take data. And this is where the birds start to get in. But at first, the birding was too difficult because again, they just didn't know enough. And it's hard to see the birds, especially when there's leaves all over the trees. How many of you noticed in the last month, it went from like, oh, there's that bird to, I don't know, is that a warbler? Hiding behind the leaves, right? That's how it goes in this kind of time of the year. So, next slide. We also have this gorgeous, gorgeous log jam in our southwest portion. So our trail actually comes out here. This, when the water goes down, there's a little gravel bar and sand area. And this thing is a hotbed for everything. So we get belts of kingfishers, obviously great from herons and bald eagles and osprey. But we also get things like muskrats and mink and beaver. Like it is our Serengeti down there. So most of the time when we go out, and Ken came down there with us, we head to this spot, do like 2 or 3 hours sitting here watching everything happen. And then we keep moving through the forest. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we first said, all right, let's make them go experience nature in the easiest way we can imagine that should be really fun and enjoyable. So we chose wildflowers. They don't move, they don't bite you, they don't fly away. Okay, now some of them can sting you, but we gave them a little bit of instruction. We kind of let them figure out which one was stinging them because they didn't know, but then they learned quickly. Well, it takes 2 or 3 repetitions. All right, so next. And prior to kind of initiating this, me and a couple of colleagues spent 2 or 3 years kind of running through the forest, tracking these flowers. And we put together a guide for 84 species. And so next slide, we've got a series of pages. Each page has the species, kind of a macro view, and then a single flower view. Across the top is when we found them blooming. Here's the leaf to scale. Here's the flower to scale. And we have colorful keys. And now we have this textbook that we give to the students saying, okay, you walk the trails, you take this with you, and you key out this thing. It isn't thousands of flowers in the bigger books, it's the ones you will find on campus. So we whittled it down to the 84 most common species and then set them out there to record what they found. Now, prior to doing this, I was walking all those 7 miles of trails every other week, counting all the flowers. Couldn't sustain it. So the students started to take over. And of course, whenever you give your passion project to somebody else, like students, it's nervous time, right? But they performed. Next slide. So we built them a web app using some modern tech. They love their phones. So we took advantage of their phones. And 99% of our students have phones, or at least someone in their group room. So this has not been an accessibility issue at all. We've never had a loan out phone. They've all had access to this, which is just amazing. So they have to go out, and when they see a flower, they pull up this app. And then they write in things. So first, what's your group number? It auto fills the date and time. And then they have to take a picture to say, this thing that I see, I'm going to call it this. I do the grading by looking at their pictures. So my grading just is like hundreds of pictures of flowers. It's the best grading that they ever get to do. Okay, next slide. And then as they scroll through, they choose the common name of the species, and then they estimate the number of flowers. Now, from a botanical point of view, flowers versus inflorescence, like the way you count is very odd. Many of you know a dandelion is a lot of flowers, like 100 flowers in a composite organization. So for those plants, each species will have a designation. If it's a composite, just count the composites, right? Don't try and individually pull apart, all the individual flowers on the dandelion. So sometimes you count individual flowers, clusters of flowers, composites, or just count the plant because they're all distributed strains on the plant. Okay? And then how many do you see? And they get to estimate numbers like, I see 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. Because if you've seen a hillside go bloom, you know some of these plants, especially things like big leaf maple or Siberian miners leaf lettuce, will be in the tens of thousands very quickly. And letting them experience that and watching week by week, and do this every single week, watch these things explode, has done far more than anything I've ever done in lecture to open their eyes to what that ecosystem is. And they actually get to see exponential growth happen in front of their eyes. Really beautiful. All right, next slide, please. And then we asked them, when you saw the flower, did the plant have leaves? And did the plant still have flower buds? And did the plant have fruit or seed forming at that time? So right now, when the students are tracking salmonberry, most of the buds are gone, but they will see little green fruit starting to develop. So they'll tag them. This allows us to see where in the progression the flower is. And so if it's early, it's going to be lots of buds, sometimes leaves, a bunch of flowers. But if it's late, you're not going to see the buds, you're going to see the fruits and seeds starting to form. So then they get an idea of tracking over time this developmental change, which most of them have never grown a plant in their life. So this is something powerful to see, and they will do this 400, 500 times. So then they go walking around the neighborhood and they're like, oh, that's ozoberry, right? Oh, that's trillium, and it just becomes part of their existence. They can't escape it anymore. Death by repetition, immersion, right? This is what we're trying to push. Next slide. Then there's the map, but of course, this is the bird thing. And the flowers are cool, sometimes they smell great, but when they started seeing pollinators like this Anna's hummingbird flying around to these flowers, or if you get to watch an Anna's hummingbird vertically shooting its beak into a huckleberry, red huckleberry, one after the other, to sip this minute amount of nectar, it's just fascinating. So then it was like, now, how do we get them to do birds? They're not going to sit still. They're not going to be as easy to count the number of petals. When's the last time you got to hold one of those flycatchers and say, Epidonyx, yeah, I got you. It's Hammond's flycatcher. Like, good luck with that. Not going to happen. So, lucky for us, Cornell University released the Merlin app with sound identification. And ever since then, all birders say, let me check Merlin real quick, right? Is it the same guess that I got, does it agree with me? And sometimes we agree with Merlin, sometimes we don't. I love it when students put down some stuff that's like neotropical. It's like, wow, that is not even possible. And of course it keeps recording, so I'm like, send me that recording. And I listen, it's like, oh yeah, song. So animal behavior is simply better. We did, from this last year, 26,000 data points of wildflowers from these students. Okay, now that used to be just me, so now I don't have to do that as much. Instead, I devoted my time to birding. So this is where Mark and I decided we're going to make this happen. Next slide, please. So we started to get this ball rolling with wildflower stuff, and we're starting to think, okay, how do we transition? Quarantine hits, and it's like no students can come to campus, no students can go into the forest, and I'm like, there's no one in the forest, they're all by themselves. Like, why can't I do this? So me and the college fight a little bit. That's fun. And Mark and I said, you know what? After they shut down a lot of the trailheads, we're like, dude, we gotta get out. We can't do this. We're not those people. We need to be in nature. So we locked arms, blood brothers, and said, we're gonna be quarantined partners. And Mark, I will finally pay attention to birds. Because all this time we've been running through the forest, I'm like, yeah, interesting noise, great birds, yeah, cool, I'm a bug guy, I'm a bug guy, I'm a bug guy. And the day I told him, like, let's do this, let's not mess around. We've got the time now. I have time to spend. So we set up camp, more or less, 2 to 3 days a week over the entire quarantine period, running up through all of those trails. Okay, so 222 days out of the quarantine period. We were out, average of 7 hours a day, rain, shine, snow, anything. And one of my favorite stories is this year when we had that ice, that kind of, quarter-inch iced everything. It was a day I was like, oh, it's birding day. Oh my gosh, it's horrific out. I can't walk on the street without slipping. So as a hiker, I got micro spikes. I was like, hey, let me put my spikes on and just go. So I show up on campus, I'm running around, I'm like, there's no birds out, like everybody's taking the day off. But there I go walking down to the river, and lo and behold, 3 Wilson snipes start doing their displays and flying back and forth. And it's like freezing rain, drizzle coming down, and I'm like shivering, trying to take these pictures, like half slipping even with my spikes. And they're out there having a grand old time. And Wilson snipes are not the most obvious bird. They don't come out and whistle and say, "Hi, look at me," right? These birds were waiting for the worst possible day to get their stuff done. And I just happened to be there. And it was just fabulous. And I froze myself the rest of the day. And there was like no more birds, but that was worth it. So we put in the time. This estimates around 1,554 hours over this period. That's just the quarantine part. We did some before, we did some after. We're still doing it today. So next slide, please. So I want to show you a few slides of the data that we've gotten. Now, Mark has uploaded a ton of stuff to eBird. And so we can break our data into 4 massive categories. This light sort of cyan color is Mark's data from 1993 moving forward. So he's been in the forest for a very, very long time. And he's seen it change, and he birded it here and there. And then we were using eBird to mark our recordings when the quarantine hit. And then we switched over to a different system called Survey 123, which allowed us to use that app. Okay. And then the number of data points just skyrocketed. And then quarantine ends, and this purple stuff is what we're doing now. So there's these 4 different categories. And I still remember the day, northern saw-whet owl, pull up in my car, getting out just like any normal day, and Mark comes running up to me like, biggest eyes kind of like that, Danny. I'm like, what, Mark? Like, are you okay? There's a northern saw-whet owl, and they perch relatively low, so probably about 12 foot up on a western red cedar, nice curved branch sitting in the little valley of the branch, just sitting there looking. I was in town, my 2 boys came that day. We just sat there for like 20 minutes on the floor, staring up at this gorgeous, gorgeous creature. And I think we've got 5 or 6 recordings of them. So just one of those magical moments. Okay, next slide. So we built an app for the students to do this as well. This we're going to spend a little bit of time. Feel free to scan the QR code if you want to follow through. Again, same thing. What's your group number? Date and time, choose your species. Next slide. So for those of you here, I gave you the checklist. Those are the species. And one of the things Mark said was, I've been birding here since the 90s. And I feel like I've never birded here before until we put that time. Now, if you've got your own neck of the woods that you bird, once you put in the time and you do the repetition, there's so many things hiding that you're so lucky to see if you can put the time in. If you can't put the time, you're going to miss a lot. So I think we ended up adding like 40 species to his list for all those years in those first like 6 months, and then trickling in other species. One of the strangest was an escaping cockatiel flying up Green River. Very extravagant. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and then you have to ask the question, how many of those birds were present? Of course, this is always an estimate. It's always an underestimate. There's probably more than we ever see. So next slide. We can track the average number of birds seen per observation over time. So here we have a year, January to December, the flock size. And this is something as a birder you probably know already, but to see it across massive swaths of data, this is when they're mating, making babies, isolating, right? And then in the wintertime, they start to flock up. And so what we can do is look per species over these years to see how those numbers change. It's really powerful. And you know, some species, we had that massive pine siskin year. It was crazy. Take a picture, be like, we'll count that later. So then we go to, you know, the computer, blow it all up, and here I am counting with my sons, 50, 100, 600 birds in a flock, easily, right? And I know for you short bird people, that's not a lot. But for some of the forest birds, that's quite a bit. Okay, so tracking that, pretty awesome. Next slide. How did you identify them? This was really important. When we did the wildflower guide, when you see it, you have a visual cue, but you can also smell it. We decided not to ask the students to smell it. But when it comes to birds, you can see them and you can hear them. But we were really curious. What's the difference? Quantitatively, when you find the bird, how do you find it? So every single data point we specify. Next slide. Here's the pie chart for all the observations. 66% are heard only for identification purposes. This is crazy because you have to learn to listen. This was the part that I was like, okay, Mark, one day I'll start listening to birds. This was a surprise to both of us, quantifying it. And some birds you never hear. So there, you know, we can individually do pie charts per species, and some of them are both. And then there's the Merlin app. This is mostly student data. We get an idea of what's happening there as well. Okay. And again, man, what an amazing, amazing tool. And I don't know if you guys have ever had a chance to directly interact with Cornell group up there, but they are doing amazing things. And this app, making it free, number one, opening the world's ears to birds is just amazing. I want to be able to contribute something like that somehow, some way. Just excellent. Okay, next slide. Then we break down the forest into different zones. So they have to say what zone they're in. Next slide. These are the various zones. So we can break it down by log jam area by the river, non-log jam area by the river in certain valleys, campus, and then the northern areas more like a park, a manicured park, so we can compare. Obviously, we get all the ducks and things down here. We get all kinds of crazy sparrows in the grassy areas. And just starlings and starlings.
Audubon Center, John Maxwell, he knows the exact moment.
And then we also have a category about what was the bird doing, where did you find it?
Eagle just drops out of the
And
sky.
so every now and then we actually will capture the birds in populations to get information.
John leads people
Right
on
now,
tracks.
you actually can see
Native and migratory birds. How much of birding is
all of it every year. These cliffs, these diamonds.
humans? We connect with the sounds of birds first, and they brought a lot of comfort, says conservationist Joshua Morris.
Tree or bush or a log, tree.
Forced us into a moment of social isolation and quiet. And during that time, we heard bird song louder. And I think
I don't want to just try and lie you with data.
that we're making those songs.
Students begin to quantitatively understand how to measure it.
Bird watchers know you can.
Out there in the real world, they get to see how this data is built. So it immerses them in the birds, but it also immerses them in the science part of it. That, again, something I could lecture all day, it just doesn't have the same sort of brain. Next slide, please. And then we've got GPS points for all of the survey 1, 2, 3 data. So just a little bit of quarantine, we didn't get that data. Then from that point on, the majority of the data we have. Next slide. So here's our heat map across our trails. The highest number of observations, the highest number of actual population of birds. This is the log jam. This is the log jam. And these are areas in the middle where we don't have trails, so we don't have specific data. And so it's very clear. We'll see hooded mergansers only by the river. Right? And strange and odd enough, we had Virginia rebels in the campus corner apartments pond. So here's the campus corner apartments. It's kind of our dorms. There's a little pond right in here. And there's actually 2 ponds, a pond up here. They would go back and forth. And we're like, you guys like this water enough? It's not the best water. And if you know them, they're very marshy birds. And they like space to hide. And there's not a lot of space to hide in this place. So, you know, they're like awkward thing, and we don't have any good pictures of them because that's LA. And we're waiting, we heard babies one time, and you know that those little black fluff balls. We're waiting for that picture so bad, but hasn't come yet. Okay, next slide, please. So they take the data goes up to the cloud, and then I have access to the database. I give them access to the database. We're using a data visualization company called Click, mainly because academic stuff is free. So they let us use their system. This is actually a business, a company that I've used in the past. I'm actually a beekeeper as well, to track diseases and things in bees for other endeavors of mine. And so the ability for the students to filter through data is so efficient. Prior to using this, I had to teach them how to use Excel in addition to getting all the data. With this, you just click around. It literally will update all the graphs as you click. I want to see this, this, and this. Everything updates. So it's at the speed of your curiosity. So instead of me having, you know, meetings with students, how do I get, what's the formula for Excel? How do I auto sum this? It's instead about the birds. Does that make sense? So this was able to transform that as well. So you just keep clicking. So we'll go through some click stuff. Next slide. Okay, so can you go to the web browser now, since I think we should have that up? I just want to give you a small taste of that. And we'll take over down here real quick. So here's our distribution of data over the years. If we want to know how the American crow has been found across the years. Oh, it's got to re-log in, sorry. The login. Can you hold this for a second? Try again. And yes, that does say 49,000 observations. So we have 2,000 observations of crows, and that's their distribution over the years. And what I do is I set up these sheets specifically for students to answer questions. So you can go through each sheet. This is our identification for the crows. Okay, so every species has something different. And again, you can just click around. And I find the students just clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking and looking at all this various information. So then what I tell them to do is say, find me a migratory bird that is present for 3 months, but disappears for the rest of the year. And I could just ask them to look the bird up, but they get to investigate it. They get to explore the data. Or I get to say, find a bird whose flock size goes from like 5 and above some parts of the year, and then is like 2 or below other parts of it, and describe the ecological ramifications of doing that. Again, I've been teaching for a while. This is absolutely fun. The students enjoy searching the data. So one of the last assignments we tell them to do is say, click around, whatever you want to show me. Show me some random trend that you found in the data. Sometimes it's something I've never even thought of. Sometimes it's something that's like, yeah, we got that, you know, everyone knows that, but like, this is the data for it. And again, when you're playing with this amount of information, this is a new tool and a new way of thinking, but it is also something that in their lifetime, big data sets is probably going to be part of their future. A lot of them are thinking about getting in the medical field. So comparing this treatment to that treatment, having the ability to look at this massive data set and interpret graphical information, again, it's just another skill that will benefit them. And instead of having them look at random data sets, they get to create the data. So every week I have them report their data so they can see their little piece of the larger parts. Can you go back to the PowerPoint, please? We got pages, man. Putting in some work tonight. So, like with the wildflower guide, we are making the book. But because it is so heavily auditory in terms of how we bird, we're trying to make the guide reflect that. And let me be very clear. It is really hard to describe the sounds that birds make to students that represent 80 different countries, 120 different languages. You don't get the easy, oh, it's, whippoorwill. They don't know what whippoorwill sounds like. So we have to do it in a different way. And we're gonna have audio recordings around my parabolic thing to show you guys, we're out there in the woods, having a good old time. Whenever we see students on the trail, we point it at them and on the phones with it. Listen. It scares them really good. It's nice. So next slide. Here's a couple of options that we're doing for how we want to present these birds. So obviously the pictures are important. You all know black-headed grosbeaks, if they get going, man, they just, they're echoing amongst the tops of the trees. So we like to call the really, really, operatic ones, the great grossoranis. And we're playing with color palettes and sonograms, and then links to more media about them per page. We're trying to figure out that sweet spot because Merlin is excellent, but we also want them to learn how to listen, not just depend on Merlin, right? And so that's going to be the trickiest part of this. And then similar to the other wildflower guide, the distribution of when we find it, information about the bird, where on the map you can find it, the different regions, and then just some fun information about the birds. Part of our assignment is a reflections piece, and our ecology students do both wildflowers and birds simultaneously. And so they really get a full dose of what the forest is providing. And one of the most important things that I get back on that feedback, that sort of personal experience part, is they hate when someone tramples their flowers on their trail. And when I hear that language, I hear connection. I hear them putting themselves on that piece of land, taking some level, I don't know if responsibility is the right word, but some sort of attachment. And that I never expected to be able to get to. And it's recurring, it happens frequently. When a student comes in, from the field, right, comes in with their phone and goes, look, and it's a red-breasted sapsucker. Some of them are pretty bold. 3.5 feet away from the tree. The images they get on their phones are just gorgeous. And they're never, ever gonna forget that experience. And I know some of you have been teachers in your past, and maybe some of you currently teachers. If you can do a lesson that a student will never forget, that's gold, right? That is absolutely everything. So it all is sort of wrapping itself up in one part. And one of the things that I'm really trying to be conscious about is how to scale this, how to give this to another campus, right? And the great thing about birds is birds will go anywhere, right? Backyards, cellars, they'll go anywhere. You can bird anywhere, right? And so with the Merlin app, with some reasonable optics, doesn't matter if you have 7 miles of trails through the forest. The wildflowers are trickier that way. You don't get nearly the diversity in heavily city areas. We get a bunch of ornamentals and things like that. And it doesn't connect to the land as much. Those things are not wild, right? And the first time the students get a chance to taste the salmonberry at the river while the peawees are just echoing their calls, this is what I get to do for a living, right? It's just fabulous. And again, without the birds, smelling flowers, it's cool. Don't get me wrong. I love some flowers. I will smell all the trillions. That's what I do. But the birds bring a whole nother dimension. And we just got a grant to do some bird recordings, sort of game cam stuff. to help the students identify with the animal behavior of the birds, some of their own individual behaviors. What it means to be scared, what it means to be hungry, how to identify with the behaviors that they see. Give them, salty food, give them sugary food, give them fatty food, see how they make their choices, right? Because we ultimately make the same choices. Equating the non-human parts of the world with our own understanding, not to humanize them, not to humanize the birds, not to say, oh, you look so human today. That's not what it's about. It's about recognizing the autonomy, right? Recognizing the freedom, the wildness, that even in the wild, they could go anywhere, but they chose to come to this place, right? They're here at Green River. Just like when my students walk the trails, they're kind of flying the trails. And there's an equality about that. There's a similarity about that. And that's the next big point we're trying to attach. Next slide, please. So here's the same graph of one of the classes. Blue is week 1, start of the quarter. Orange is week 10. They start paying attention. So whenever you can document what you're doing as a teacher is working is also very important. Like I said, I never thought it would be this good. Never. The wildflowers make it cool, but the birds take it to that next level. It allows the students to really lock in on understanding a little bit about the ecosystem. We also, in the fall, we don't do wildflowers, we do mushrooms. Because we have amazing, amazing mushrooms. If you know a little bit about mushrooms, they're really hard to identify. We don't have good keys for the students. But slowly, we're building quarter by quarter specific ways to immerse students. Lucky for us, the birds are good all year round. Next slide, please. So this kind of gets back to that stewardship of the land idea, right? Students hear the birds everywhere they go. They tell me stories about, they show their parents their pictures and they identify things for their parents, and their parents will sometimes get a hold of me. I don't know how, but they get a hold of me and they're like, hey, my son or daughter, like they're really happy they're learning these things in your class. And it's not that I need parents' approval, but if it's gone through that many levels of filtering and come back to me, something good is happening. And maybe that means the parents will make different decisions in their lawn, maybe not use as many pesticides, like who knows? This is where it's going to start. And again, a community college with 150 students per quarter, it's a small chunk of the 8 billion people. But like I said when we started, this is something that has to change. We can't keep letting go of our connection to nature. And the birds are just so good at letting us do that. So here's our lovely American dipper. One day, me and my mom were like, oh, what do you want to do? Let's go down to the river. And this dipper was there for 45 minutes, jumping back and forth, feeding, stretching, bathing, just everything we could ever want. So I got this lovely little pose. They know the wildflower names. They really begin to connect. So we're going to be pushing this immersion type of model for a long time. As long as I teach, I'm going to keep those students out in the woods as much as possible and trying to build those connections back to the land. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so now you know a little bit about what we do on campus and what we're continually trying to improve. And we also post a ridiculous amount of pictures and videos on our biology club Facebook page. And we always love it when Osprey come to town. And last story, I was spending way too much time in my office just because this quarter's been a little wild. One of our teachers went down, so I had to cover classes and just got to hire a new person. So there's extra work. So I'm sitting there in my office and lo and behold, I see this osprey land on one of these Western red cedars, nice tall Western red cedar. And for about 5 minutes, it's just sitting there looking around. We have a small pond nearby. It kind of, it's looking down in the pond every now and then. And then of course, like 9 crows come by and start diving bombing it for a while, and they get bored. And then this osprey dives straight into the pond and pulls on a goldfish and flies away. And I'm just sitting there like, they're everywhere. You just have to keep your eyes open and keep your ears open. Thank you for your attention. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah.
The logo for the learning forest, an R and a E and an S. What is the-
Yeah, can you go back to that slide?
I'm sorry, which one?
I think it's 1 or 2.
Maybe two back.
There we go. So one of the things we teach in ecology is every single form of life does 3 things. And we don't go as far as to say it's the purpose of life, but these are things that have to happen with the species. You have to survive long enough, the S, to reproduce, the R, before you die. That's the game. And you can see that in every single form of life. And what we say is, it's an objective description of the function of life, in that everything that is currently alive today came from something that survived long enough to make them for them. That's the game. And so whether it's a paramecium under a lab slide, or it's one of these birds defending its nest with crows and ravens, you can't just go at it really hard. You guys know they're mortal enemies forever, for eternity. They'll do anything, right, to defend. And it really comes down to that understanding. And so we try and mimic that across all the forms of life. How does this plant, this is the way I say it, how does this plant SRD? And they just know immediately what that means. How does the fungus SRD? It's all the same thing generally, but the details are different. How?
I don't know if anyone read the same article I did today, but a bunch of California condors died from the bird flu. Like 15% of the population.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's not awesome. So for those of you who didn't hear, there was a report that came out that 50% of the Congo population died from the avian bird flu. Yeah, that's not great. Mark always has this dream to see condors come back to the caves. And I said, Mark, when the condors come back, we're done. We've done our work. We're done, or we'll wake up, one of the two. Every now and then we'll see a gigantic, bald eagle and say, is that an golden eagle? Is it a condor? And just play and have fun. It's always a juvenile bald eagle.
Do your students seem to sway towards one step that say birds more than mushrooms, bugs, and flowers?
So the question is, do my students kind of, are they biased towards one type of life or another? Do they have certain preferences? I will say this, birders are the absolute best naturalists, but mushroom people are a whole nother level of like intensity. Okay, probably because of the mushrooms, but the idea is some students, man, you send them out for a mushroom hunt, they will come back with the most amazing data. They will take all the pictures, they will buy little, things for their camera to get microscopic views, like they'll make it happen. They have that tendency. I don't know what it is. The mushroom people, there's one part of them that kind of equals birders and maybe surpasses it in the wild side. But other students will be really into the flowers. So it kind of mixes, and we try to kind of make mixed groups so that everyone has their interests met and we get the best data as well. But it's always a mix. The students will find what they like, and usually in the group they'll divide up and take the specific tasks that they want. And every now and then, from my teaching philosophy, it's like, it's great to do the fun stuff, but you have to learn how to do all the things, right? So spend a week on this and 2 weeks on that, or whatever. So don't get locked into just having fun, because there's things like duty, right, where you set fun aside, get the job done, and then go back to fun. We try and instill some of those things as well. But I would definitely say birds have the highest average in terms of curiosity, attention, and willingness to stand in the rain and get the data. Because for those of you that use Merlin, when it's pouring, like it doesn't work very well. So we're just standing there looking back and like nothing. They can hear this bird so clear, and or by the river, the water, the movement of the water, the sound that Merlin has is kind of like, yeah, river water, cool. You hear nothing.
Are there a lot of invasive plant species on the campus in all your trails and acreage?
I would say, well, I'm sort of an eco snob. There's too many, no matter what the number is. Himalayan blackberry is actually relatively well controlled on our campus because we have a natural resources group and they kind of work on it every now and then. They have a few plots where they're trying and demonstrating for their students different control techniques, how they work, how they don't work, how long it takes. So there's a pretty good control on that. But for the 84 species, I think something like 30 of them are non-native, and probably like 15 are invasive. So probably the most invasive still is the Himalayan blackberry, because it's here to stay. We also have the thistles, the old thistles, Canada thistle. We don't actually have that much ivy. You really have to look for the ivy. And again, that's part of the natural resources training to get that off of the trees as much as possible. We've tracked it and it's decreasing over time. Holly, English holly is also decreasing over time. Scotch broom is like one patch left. St. John's wort is still poking its head here and there. I will say we do have a crazy rare plant. It's the phantom orchid. And all the time I spend in the hills hiking, looking for beauties like that, never seen it. I mean, we're talking thousands of miles of trail. We have one right next to a disturbed fence on the hillside facing Highway 18. And the heat recently has made it not as happy. So we're wondering if it's going to be lost. We're actually able to demonstrate, I think pretty clearly right now, we had wild ginger, a plant that the heat over the past 2 years is completely gone. It is not coming back. We have been on our hands and knees searching the same plots we've seen 5, 6 years in a row, and it is gone. We can probably plant it back, and we probably will at some point. But this is also some of the stuff that comes out of this kind of data analysis, this high level detail, GPS points for everything, right? We can track this in really good clarity.
You recommend the access cap to the reserve?
Oh man, there's no good access. Can you go way back there on this one?
But we need the survey. They're gonna have to take this.
Oh, that log jam is special. Way back in the. There. Okay, the best way is to park in this P5. Okay, and that might actually be blocked off because the safety has some stuff back there. There's a little metal gate that they put here, a little wire. You might park here, and there's a trail. You'll find this west pond. You might find a mallard or two in there, and every now and then wood ducks. Then you just follow this trail straight to the log. That's the most direct route. This little hillside going down, it's actually just been modified with wood chips, and instead of being half a foot wide, it's like 2.5 feet wide, which was done by people who wanted to ride their motorcycles down to the river and cut up and just go crazy. So we've been having some issues with that, but I think they found other places to go. So that's the best way. And then going back up is just the easy way out. But this connector path right here is also pretty wild. There's not a lot of trails. Very few people go on this. So you get some really cool stuff back there. This is all basically wetland marsh area. So we've got the main river and then there's an oxbow that cuts back here. This turned all into marsh. So think of like massive stone cabbage and horsetails, that kind of stuff. Every now and then you get a marshman kicking back there, a lot of wood ducks hanging out back there. The log jam is where it's at. Oh my gosh. Yellow warblers, yellow rumped warblers are going crazy right now. We're waiting for the peawees to come in. Tanager has been out, goldfinch has been out. We had a solitary sandpiper, which is not super common. Just once, a couple new gulls, California gulls, and then those gulls hybrid things that come and go, glaucus, western glaucus, hybrid gulls. Plenty of bald eagles, plenty of osprey, green heron occasionally, great blue heron a ton, black swift rarely, box swift occasionally, yellow green, violet green swallows a ton, and then a few hang around northern rough-winged swallows that you're pretty much guaranteed to get who stay for an hour or so. They just come flutter and flutter around. Plenty of spotted sandpiper. It's a really, really good spot.
I found vanilla leaf.
Absolutely, it is blooming gorgeously right now, yeah. There's probably 9 or 10 trails where it's guaranteed every year, healthy, vibrant, and the flower stems are like 3-4 inches tall, like, yeah, we've got really healthy populations. One of the less common ones is baneberry, and it's been popping up here and there. If you don't know about baneberry, it's one of the deadliest plants out there. The berries, it only takes 4 or 5 to take out a full-grown human. I think it slows the heart down. It's much more toxic than digitalis, but kind of a similar effect. So those bloom, and those are pretty rare. And that we actually have a reasonable sized population of that. Crazy thimbleberries, really good thimbleberries. We have from the Asparagiaceae, false Solomon sill, star-flowered false Solomon sill, clasping twisted stalk. And then we've got things like the false Lily Valley, the fairy bells, trilliums, kind of in that monocot group of things. Spotted coral roots, the orchids, the phantom orchid. Yeah, we've got a lot, and we've got some disturbed area and some less disturbed area. So there's quite a bit of habitat for all those things. Right now, Mark and I, we always dream up these competitions, like the plants are fighting over it or whatever. And, you know, salmonberry berries and osoberry or Indian plum berries, they're about neck and neck. We'll wait and see who gets right first. The osoberry is eaten by the birds really fast on our campus, whereas the salmonberry, there's never enough anything to eat all of it. So I tell my students, have 10, don't even think about it. There's plenty more. But then when the thimbleberry comes out, it's like, quarters ending up, don't worry about the thimbleberry. I agree with them. Because that is my absolute favorite thing.
Any bear signs?
We've definitely had bears in the past. No confirmed signs in probably like 4 or 5 years. But the people who live there and spend a lot more time on the trail than us, walking the dogs every day, say they see them occasionally. We get elk, we get deer, like I said, mink, muskrat, beaver, raccoon, possum, occasionally bobcat. So it's a solid forest, a very, very solid forest. And again, can't beat it. It's like right off the trail, right off the parking lot. Some of that spills onto campus. We just had a flyover of like 12 evening grosbeaks the other day. It's like, oh my gosh, crossbills come in every now and then. Our ruby crown kinglets look like they took off. Fox sparrows look like they took off already. Berry thrush has been gone for a long time. It's for this year. Again, you have the sheet in front of you. There's a lot of stuff to get. Some of that stuff is just flyovers, right, like short-eared owl. Never actually seen it land on campus, just flying by. The college also yeah, the college has a natural resources forestry program. And I would say it's less forestry and more natural resources now. So in the past, we've had some legendary forestry people that were all about cutting trees down, and that's all that mattered. And that was the thing, in the 70s and 80s. So we had a really good program. So there's a lot of reputation that came with that. So a lot of students would get trained here. Recently, we've hired more ecologists to fill those positions. So they're more about the whole natural resource part of it. But they're still like, this is for humans, right? Not for the wildlife, exactly. Which is better, but it isn't just clear cut everything, sell it, and see what happens afterwards. Or we have to wait 60 years before we can do it. They're a lot more conscious about it. And we work with them a lot to manage the trails. They do all the work, we give recommendations, because part of their training is to have the kids out there with chainsaws doing the work. And so they spend probably 20% of their forest work on our campus, and then the other 80% in wherever they need to go, eastern Washington, they take them all over the place. And last I heard, they're the only bachelor's program for certain type of natural resource. WSU stopped it, UW stopped their version, so we're getting tons of students with limited spots right now. Yeah, so we work with them quite a bit. The co-author for the Wildflower book is, we call it one of the ecology professions they have for natural resources. We try and keep as much tie as possible, but like any academics, we butt heads a little bit. I tell them, well, what about the nematode worms in the soil? And they're like, what? That happens, but that's good academic fun.
Ken and Barbara and I volunteered at the Students Creek plant sale recently, and some young people came to our booth. Students in the past study. Okra class and mushroom class. They were thrilled.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, and I think, it's hard to measure, but our students are going out there in the community, right? We also have a pretty good connection with the Green River Coalition, which does a lot of reconstructive work on the Green River. So a lot of students will get internships and, through their study periods while they're at the college with them, and then extend outwards from them. So in the conservation groups, things like that, our Green River College is pretty well known. I think the ones that get surprised are the ones that are like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to take an ecology class, and then all of a sudden they're out in the middle of the rain and muddy, learning what it's all about. And I tell them, like, you don't get to say no the way the birds don't get to say no. You just have to endure it. Right? You have to find that part of you that can say, okay, let me bring the umbrella, let me take a little bit of suffering and see what this is really about. You got to put yourself in it. And we're just lucky to have a safety team that everything's a cell phone call away. The other day we were on campus and there was 2 older ladies. One lady was having some heart issues. So she was not able to take more than 10 steps at once. So we called safety, they drove a little buggy down, took her out, no problem. So it's a fairly safe place to be. But of course we do get the occasional, some student gets a hatchet and they just start hacking everything down, or they catch a random fire. Over quarantine, there were 2 groups of people that started living in the forest. And of course we're like, well, maybe they got displaced and this is all they got. So we let them live for a bit, and then you guys are playing loud music and barbecuing, so like that's not, you got to go now, right? So we have all kinds of interesting things like that. But during the quarter, when the students are around, the neighborhood people, you get to see the same faces over and over and over. So it's a really cool place. You're in the middle of the forest. A couple of our trails, you're on them and you're almost on a knife edge. It's just downward slopes going downhill, big old ferns and Douglas fir, western red cedar, and you're like, am I in the middle of Auburn right now? Like, it's just a really special place, and we're doing everything we can to keep it that way. Without all of the deer that would normally be in the forest, the underbrush is not becoming trees. So it's slowly turning into more of a grassland. So natural resources has to make sure the forest stays a forest. That makes sense. So there's management there. It's not a wildlife refuge, but we'll manage it substantially. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite your group to come to our monthly meeting starting in September.
I'll give my students extra